I have some good news for you. One of the most frequently asked questions we get at Tectonic is how light or how dark do you roast? We have heard you loud and clear, and we've even been answering your questions individually, and I'm here to tell you that we have some great news for you today. We have added a seismograph to each of our coffees, which now depicts the color of our roasts. Do you get it? Seismograph, tectonic coffee, tectonic plates, earthquakes, get it? You see, it's a little hard to communicate using just light, medium, or dark roasts. We could even start using fancy words or terms like full city, but really, what does that mean? Your interpretation of full city is probably a little bit different to mine. So we are doing away with those very limiting terms, and we are going to come up with a much more precise way to communicate roast color. How does it all work, I hear you asking? Well, I'm about to get to that. Thanks for asking. At Tectonic, we have a device called a Javalytics. It is a spectrometer that uses near-infrared light reflected off coffee to measure the degree of roast. It then gives us a numerical value on the gourmet scale, which has been widely adopted by the specialty coffee industry to help us communicate about roast color. We use this instrument on every single batch of coffee we roast by grinding a small amount of coffee once it's cooled, putting it onto a petri dish, and then running a test. Fun fact: the gourmet scale, which we widely use in the specialty coffee industry, was originally invented by a gentleman called Carl Staub. You see, many moons ago, he invented this spectrometer to help McDonald's get the color of their French fries just right. He made a killing off that invention, and after it was all said and done, he turned and wondered what other industries may need such a device. He approached the fledgling specialty coffee industry and asked 100 different roasters to send him their lightest and their darkest roasts. And after a lot of testing, he came up with two different scales, the commercial scale and the gourmet scale, which is what we use today. Back to Tectonic. The scale, or in our case, the seismograph, is really easy to use. The higher the number, the lighter the roast. The lower the number, the darker the roast. Remember when I said that using words to describe roast is incredibly limiting? That is because the gourmet scale ranges from 0 all the way up to 100. And every single number has a decimal point. So we're talking hundreds of numbers to describe roast. So light, medium, or dark, as I mentioned, just do not cut it. For our sake, our seismograph, I've decided to go as high as 85 points on the gourmet scale. In my opinion, I believe any higher than that, you start to introduce some lemongrass flavor notes, which could mean a roast defect, i.e. too light, no good. Then on the other end, we've gone down as low as 55 points. Now that is just before second crack. What? Second crack? No, you dirty birds, that is not a reference to what's down under, if you know what I'm saying. What is second crack, I hear you ask? Well, I cannot talk about second crack without first describing what first crack is. That's right, first crack. Okay, so green coffee or unroasted coffee comes to us in 132 pounds or 152 pound sacks. That coffee lands and it contains about 12% moisture. So when we start to roast that coffee, it is entering into a roaster somewhere around 400 degrees. And I like to think that for every part of that 12% moisture that is expelled from the bean as it heats, there is some part of that moisture that is contained within. Now, at a certain temperature, that moisture that is still contained within the seed, that we call beans, is starting to get superheated, and it turns from a moisture molecule into gas or steam. Paralysis of the cellular structure happens and we hear this audible pop or crack. For a more dramatic understanding of what is happening, think of popcorn. Corn kernels, when you heat them, eventually they pop into the popcorn that you pop in your gob and eat at the movies. Remember the movies? Remember when we used to go to the cinema? This milestone in the roasting cycle is so important to us roasters that we actually track it from when it's audible all the way to when we drop the coffee out into the cooling tray. We call that time the development time ratio. Now, if we continue to roast that coffee past first crack and we start to go darker and darker, we start to introduce carbolic rings into the organic material that is the bean, and further paralysis of the cellular structure happens as the residual oils start to boil. We get a second audible pop, which we call second crack. Ever seen oily coffee? Well, that is because the coffee has become super porous and brittle, and the oils that were once inside the bean have seeped up to the surface. Ugh. So on our graph, 55 is about as dark as we're going to go, which is just a little bit before that second crack. Over time, you'll be able to actually correlate these numbers to the taste of our coffee in what is actually a kind of a cool science experiment. We are being really open here and actually quite transparent into how we roast and how we communicate with you. We hope that helps you on your journey through this specialty coffee world. And as always, thanks for supporting small business.